Audits. Anyone ever done an audit? Everyone ever been an auditor? Anyone a member of ISACA? Yeah. Good. Good. You're reviewing your entire environment from a holistic standpoint. There are narrow scope audits, but all of your organization should be audited on a fairly regular basis. You want to make sure before you start the audit, you know what it is you're trying to do. You want to know what that scope is, what you are allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, how you're going to go about doing it, which should be set by process and policy and standards. And the results are a big part of the audit, because if you don't get the results, if you don't present the results in a report, it's not useful. What are you looking for from that audit? You want to see whether or not your controls are being met or they're doing what they are intended to do. You put them in place for a reason. Are those reasons being fulfilled? And overall, you can decide what the security status is built on those. In the military, for a long time, we had a reporting mechanism called SORTS, Status of Readiness, Training, and something else. I forget what the last one was, SORTS. And what it was is every operational unit had to make a SORTS report on a weekly basis to base command. Base command would go to higher command. Higher command would go to headquarters. And headquarters would be able to say, our entire branch of the military is ready to fight, or we're not ready to fight. We need more training. That's a very useful tool. That's a very powerful tool. The efficacy of these things depend on a lot of factors, but it can be used in very, very important ways. They help you be more secure in terms of a security audit. Overall, if you know there's controls that aren't working here on these systems, you can look at those same controls elsewhere, or you can look at similar systems that need protection for similar vulnerabilities. Who is accountable for these things? Overall, the responsibilities are assigned to managers for those lines of business. They are the ones who have to demonstrate due care. However, it doesn't obviate individual accountability. Security officers, users, they all have some accountability for maintaining or being in compliance with those controls, right? Who else do you have to pay attention to? The regulators, statutes, published administrative law, right? And what else do you need it for? Make sure your reputation stays good. You don't want to be seen as the company that gives away its customer information. That's just a bad thing. All right, so what do you do? How do you conduct an audit? First, site survey. What will help you do the site survey? Do you have to do it from scratch every time? Do you have to walk around each room and follow each bit of cable for every single audit? Depends what the audit is for. Depends what the scope of the audit is. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you have to touch each box. But sometimes the wiring diagram is used as audit purposes. It's actually used to substantiate the current state, and you're supposed to see what it is, the controls placed on those things. You should be able to review the documentation associated with these things. Who's telling the auditors which controls have been selected and which ones are in place? You are. You've already made those decisions. You've implemented them. The auditor isn't deciding for themselves which controls are best for your organization. Your organization has already decided what level of risk acceptance you're going to enact. What they're going to do is just make sure that they're comparing what you said you're going to do against what you're actually doing. They're going to look at your logs. Again, those are great representations of how well your controls are working. They're going to look at your risk analysis and see if the controls that you picked are in accord with what it is your goals, your stated goals are. They might look at your pen test. Do the auditors themselves conduct penetration testing? They might. They might. They might. If it's within their scope. If it's within their scope. But they might you might have a different party to review those test results than the auditors themselves. You might want to have more checks and balances on these things. And they're going to look at your configuration data. They're going to look at your change management results. They're going to look at your configuration management results. And they might do their own scan of the system to determine what the current configuration is. They're going to observe. They might interview. Anyone sit through an audit interview? It's kind of uncomfortable, isn't it, sometimes? Because it's in your best interest to be as honest and open and straightforward as possible. On the other hand, you're kind of like being asked to rat out your own organization, right? No, I use the same password over and over again. I'm sorry, right? They might do their own, oh, I'm sorry, it's right here, isn't it? The auditors might do their own vulnerability and penetration testing. What are the kinds of things they look at? They're going to look at some of the security devices. Those are controls. They're going to look at the system configuration. Does it allow the ports and services that your controls are supposed to have been disabling? It's going to look at identity management. How are you creating accounts? How are you enacting and enforcing your password policies? How are you doing your access controls, right? They're going to look at crypto controls. Are you following the crypto processes that you said you were going to do, that you have by your policy and set in place? How are you managing your keys? How are you issuing keys? How are you revoking keys? Do you have a process in place for each of those? Pick an example of one and go for it, and they might follow it through to the end. Here's a person who got fired. What happened with their key? They're going to look, they might look at your contingency and disaster plans. Again, depending on the scope of the audit, this might be the only thing that they're auditing. And they might find physical security very important too. One of the biggest difficulties we have in our organizations domestically is tailgating, piggybacking. What is that?
It's where you, who may be an authorized user, walks in, but I follow in right after you without authentication.
I use my badge on the key, I open the door, and I hold the door open for you, right? Problem was I was raised too polite. It's a bad Midwestern upbringing, right? Instead of slamming the door in your face and giggling about it. Ha, Andy, I know you forgot your card today. Ha.
That's what I do.
Drive home and go get your card, right? Post-audit. They've gathered all this information. They have to analyze it. Much like incident response. You have it. Now you have to look through and see what you got. They're going to make findings based on best practices, based on the controls you picked, based on what standards you set for your organization. They're going to say, okay, you're in compliance here, you're out of compliance here. You said you were going to do X, instead you're doing Y. They're going to make a presentation to management. Management paid for the audit. They want to know the results. They want to know whether they're doing good or they're doing poorly. From a management perspective, is an audit that says everything is fine valuable? Why not, Andy?
When you get something that says everything's fine,
it makes you wonder if the audit was any good, right?
Yeah.
You want to even just see a couple things, even something minor. You want to know that they went through everything, that they were looking at everything at a level of granularity and comprehensiveness, that they were able to detect something that might be wrong, right? Dirty secret here. When I go to publish a paper, I'll leave in some typos. I'll leave in some bad grammar. Anyone think of an idea why?
Just to see if it gets edited.
Just to see if it gets edited and
to see if anybody's actually reading it.
See if anyone's actually reading it. Also to give them something to feel good about catching. If they find the low-hanging fruit, they're not going to mess with my good stuff. They're not actually going to change my content. Let them play with that stuff. Give them a little something to feel useful. You know, good. Thank you so much. Oh, that verb tense. Oh, good job. Thank you. And I sneak through the rest of it, right? Good. Also, the audit report may be different depending on where they're going to publish it. Some publicly traded organizations, the auditors have to publish it to the SEC, right? Different audience. It may go to the board instead of management, depending on who's paying for the audit, who the audit is for. And then there's a follow-up. You've done the audit, you've delivered the report. Why do they do a follow-up? To make sure that you made the corrections that they recommended. That should be pretty straightforward. Again, it's like, oh, I've done the spell check. Okay, great, I fixed those things. That should be real easy to find and track changes, right? Good. All right. Contractual agreements. One of the things that we are responsible for is maintaining security even when we've contracted out managed services. So one of the things we should know about is how to manage those contractual agreements. For instance, has anyone ever worked in a leased environment where all their equipment actually belongs to the vendor? Has anyone ever worked in an environment where you're leasing bodies, where it's actual contract personnel doing the IT work, for instance? Okay, good. Good. What is the strongest tool you have in your toolbox to ensure they're complying with what the agreement says?
The agreement?
Yeah, I'm sorry. What do we call it? Service level agreement, the SLA. They don't get paid if they don't hit these marks, right? That's a huge tool. That's an awesome tool. It's very, very effective. It doesn't mean that you're giving up responsibility for it. What it says is, in the agreement, what are they going to provide for you? How are they going to maintain your CIA triad? What kind of resources are they going to put into place? People, budget, tools, devices, standards, what are they going to follow? Who's responsible for that? You are. You still have to maintain the privacy of that data. You're still responsible for the security of your customer data even when it's been ported to somebody else. You have to make sure that that policy is being enforced. Even that means you have to conduct audits of that provider and go there and make sure that it's done. That's what you have to do. Customers should not be affected by this. Again, transparency to them. Just because you've subbed it out to somebody else, it should have no impact on their business. And of course, you want it documented. Make sure everything is discrete and repeatable. Before you give them anything, make them commit to it, make them sign to it, put it into the contract. Don't just hand over your data and say, great, we think you're going to do well. Put it in the wording. Use auditors, either yourself as an internal audit or a third party paid to go and hammer them and make sure they're in accordance with the agreement. Makes sense.